Today, I'm going to preview for you Blasphemous The Board Game. This is based on a video game of the same name, and I can tell you firsthand, it is just as punishing and tormenting as that one is, but in different ways. This is an abstracted version of that game, but we are penitents that are adventuring around the land of Cvstodia to do a number of different things while on our pilgrimage. You're going to be taking skill checks, you're going to be going on quests, you're going to be fighting all sorts of different enemies, and ultimately getting into a confrontation with a nemesis. In this prototype, and it must be noted that this is a prototype in front of us, we had just one scenario or one pilgrimage that ultimately took us face to face with this guy here. This is our nemesis, and ultimately the first person to defeat him or win in combat 3 times is going to win this pilgrimage. And like I said, this is a prototype that I have here in front of me, so there may be some changes between this and the final product. But as you can see here, we have the main board filled with enemies, our penitents, and the board is going to have on it a number of different locations that are connected by these various routes, as well as smaller locations that aren't represented by a bigger graphic. Over on the left here, we have the miracle board. The miracle board, ironically, is going to be holding all of the enemies. We have this seeded for the beginning of the game with a level 1, 2, and 3 enemy that are going to come from the enemy deck. The other thing on the miracle board are the vestige cards. You can see each deck of vestige cards here, but each enemy is also going to be randomly assigned a vestige card. These vestige cards are things that the penitents are going to be able to acquire throughout the game, not only by defeating enemies, but going to certain locations and buying them. The vestige cards are going to go to the left of your player board. There's prayers, beads, and abilities. These are going to do a number of different things, from letting you mitigate different skill checks you're going to have to encounter, but also enhancing the very die that you're going to use to attempt those skill checks. The abilities are oftentimes going to come with them die faces that you're going to swap in and out on your very dice. And those skill checks are going to happen all over the game. At various locations, when you explore, you're going to look into tomes, reading passages, and making decisions, potentially facing skill checks. There's going to be quests across the top of the board that often also involve skill checks. Not to mention, combat is effectively a combat skill check in and of itself. And the player board also has a number of different tracks on it. Across the bottom of the board, you're going to track your destiny, your pain, and your whispers. And down the right-hand side, you're going to have your fervor, your health, and your tears of atonement. The tears are the currency that you're going to spend in most cases to acquire vestige cards. Your health is fairly self-explanatory, and your fervor is going to be spent usually during skill checks or combat to mitigate some of the die rolls and to enhance some of what you're doing either before or after combat. And of course, you're also going to have your penitent card on your player board. At the beginning of the game, you're actually going to get 3 cards for your chosen penitent, and you're going to choose which state you want to be in. The differences between these cards are subtle, but significant in that they have slightly different abilities at the bottom, as well as resistances to the various damage that you might take throughout the game. And the last element of your player board is your bile flask. This is going to actually start empty, but you can fill it at various locations instead of getting health on your health track to effectively get an artificial additional 3 health. So if you're at the top of your health track with a full bile flask, you've effectively got 9 health to work with. Down this side of the board, we have a few decks of cards, the main one being the pilgrimage deck. The pilgrimage is effectively the scenario that you're playing when you play this game, and the top couple cards of that, at least in this case, were set up and some of the rules for this specific pilgrimage. Not to mention, it's going to have the victory condition, the general thing that we're trying to do. In this case, we needed to defeat or encounter the nemesis 3 times, getting 3 of his cards by winning that confrontation. Additionally, you're going to have some personal quests and then an enemy deck that is going to be used to fill that miracle board over here on the right. Over on the other side of the board, we have the arena. This is where the confrontation is going to take place with the nemesis. It is a more involved version of the combat that you're going to encounter with the enemies on the board. The gameplay for a given round is broken up into 2 phases, the dawn phase and the sunset phase. The dawn phase is where you're going to be spending most of your time, where players in turn order are going to go through a series of steps to adventure across, go on quests, do skill checks, fight enemies, all those sorts of things. And the sunset phase is more than just a cleanup phase. It's where the pilgrimage deck is going to generally move things forward and act as a bit of a timer for the game. At the beginning of the dawn phase, the active player is going to check all of the components that are in front of them to see if there's anything that triggers at that point. If not, they're going to go on to the optional movement phase. When you move, you're going to move up to 2 spaces that are connected. So for instance, if I'm here in 1, I could move 1 and I could move 2. But you have to follow these routes that are printed between the different locations. Also note that if you ever leave a location that has an enemy in it, you're going to take some damage that they'll do that's across the top of their card. That is just damage that you're going to have to suffer, but keep in mind, dying in this game is not as painful as it might seem. You are going to die and you're going to come back. It is just part of the way this game flows. After you've moved, you're going to optionally take the location action of the location that you're in. In this case, I could take 20 Destiny and use this symbol, which is a portal, to move to the other location on the board that has the portal symbol. Some locations on the map are going to represent the Prideu. The Prideu is where you can take an alternate location action instead of the main location action. There are 2 options here, at least in this pilgrimage. One is to actually spend Tears of Atonement to get rid of guilt. More on that in a second. The other is to actually change the state of your penitent card. So if you didn't like the resistances you had, or maybe some of the powers, you can swap it for one of the other 2. Other location actions include gaining resources, getting health back, spending resources in order to get vestige cards to enhance your penitent. But after you've taken your location action or not, you're going to have to take a mandatory main action. The main action can be one of 3 things. You can fight if you're in a location with another enemy. You can dash, which is effectively just one more movement if you'd like. And then finally, if you're in a safe place, which is a space that doesn't have an enemy in it, you can explore. When you fight, you're going to reference the card of the enemy where you're standing. So for example, if this penitent was here with this flagellant, you're going to look at this card and see that it's going to require a 1 and a 1 on a combat roll. Whenever you roll, you're going to roll 3 dice, and there are faces that have different symbols and different values on this. But again, those can be enhanced with some of the vestige cards. But before you roll the dice at all, there's a few other steps that you can take, including ones where you can ask for help. So for example, if I was in this same location or in an adjacent location to this character, they could ask me for help. If they do, and I say no, I have to take a guilt token. Now, guilt tokens are bad. When you have a guilt token, you're going to get a -1 to all of your stats, including combat rolls. After you roll with guilt, you have to subtract 1 from any one of your dice. So guilt is bad. So if someone asks you to participate, you can participate and you will get some rewards there. Whether I participate or not, this is when penitents will sacrifice. If they want, they can reduce their health by 1 to get 1 fervor. Now remember, fervor is a resource that you can spend on vestige cards as well as your penitence card to enhance your rolls and to mitigate some of what the combat is going to be like. Ultimately though, when it's time, you're going to roll your dice. If someone participated, they're going to roll their dice too. All we need on all of those dice, in this case, is a 1 and a 1 on any 2 of the faces. If you get that, you're going to win that combat. You will remove that enemy from the board, and then you're going to get some rewards. Each enemy card has a reward in the upper right-hand corner, not to mention the vestige card that is below that enemy. If someone participated, the player who is the active player gets to choose whether that helper is going to get the reward from the enemy or the vestige card, so you will get something out of it. Whether you're in a space with an enemy or not, you could also dash. When you dash, it's effectively just an additional movement to an adjacent space, remembering that when you dash and you're leaving a space with an enemy, you're still going to take some of that vengeance damage. A lot of the time, though, you're going to find yourself exploring as your main action. Now, when you explore, you have to be in a safe location without any other enemies. You're going to take 2 10-sided die and roll them up. Whatever the value is here, in this case, 68, you're going to add your destiny to it. Say I had 20 destiny, that's 88. Another player at the table is going to take one of the tomes. There's a general tome for all of Cvstodia, and then there's 3 tomes for this pilgrimage for specific locations on the map. You're going to have that player reference the entry for that number and read it to you. There's going to potentially be some options to choose from, potentially skill checks, or maybe even a combat check. These will often result in you getting some resources, potentially some significant resources, maybe another pilgrimage card that you're going to draw and resolve. A lot of things are going to happen when you explore, but this is the main way that you're going to be spending at least the first part of the game as you're building up your character to take on more enemies and then to finally get to the confrontation. Before we talk about the confrontation, let's talk about these quests. This is the last thing you can do on your turn after your main actions, and it is optional. If you're in a location where you can complete a quest or try to, you can do so. In this pilgrimage, we had 3 quests laid out at the beginning of the game, but there are other public quests that might come out throughout the game. Those quests are oftentimes going to have random locations associated with them and potentially no locations that might just be more of an ongoing quest. But if you're in a location that has one of these tokens, you can try to achieve that corresponding quest. These are often, like I said, a skill check. Once these quests have been completed, which will be done in a variety of different ways, a few things are going to happen, but mainly that player who completes it successfully is going to be able to take that quest, at which point it becomes a relic, which is a powerful boon that's going to affect their gameplay for the rest of the game, maybe mitigating some die rolls and maybe enhancing their skills significantly. Separate from the quest though, and even the main actions that you might take, if you on your turn move into a location where the Nemesis is, you're actually going to enter into a confrontation. When you do, you're going to move your penitent over to the arena, followed by the Nemesis after you've drawn the combat card for the confrontation. The combat card for the confrontation is going to have a few things on it. At the top, you're going to see a diagram. Once you've chosen your node for your penitent, you're going to flip over this card and you'll see, first and foremost, a red spot where the Nemesis is going to go. And then there's going to be a bunch of different shapes and types of locations that you might be in. You might be in one that gives you a benefit. You might be in one that's not really connected to the rest of the nodes. These are going to give you an opportunity to flee the confrontation altogether. But if you want to take on the Nemesis, which is the whole point of the game, you're going to potentially reposition yourself on the arena according to that diagram in a way that you think is going to give you the best chances of overcoming the confrontation. Some of the nodes will carry with them more damage at the end of the confrontation. Some of the nodes won't, but they'll have some sort of penalty to the stat check. The first thing you're going to do is a stat test. So you're going to take your stat die, and depending on where you're standing, you're going to roll it up to try to overcome a stat test. On success, you're probably going to get a benefit that's going to really reward you for the rest of the confrontation. If not, you're effectively just going to take more damage before the fight even begins. The next step is a combat test. Now, this combat test is very much like the ones with the normal enemies, but it's going to be significantly harder, and you can't ask for help during a confrontation. Again, you're going to roll your dice trying to achieve all of the numbers and symbols that are on the combat card. Then you're going to look at the counterattack. If you have some of the symbols that are listed on the counterattack, you won't take the damage from the counterattack. But finally, with the confrontation, you're going to look at the very bottom, and depending on which node you're standing on in the arena, you're just definitely going to take additional damage. Now, keep in mind, if you have the right resistance, you might be able to resist some of this damage. Also keep in mind, if you're able to succeed in defeating the combat card, even if you were to die, you get the combat card, which is the overall point of trying to attempt these confrontations. At the very end of your turn, no matter whether you had a confrontation, a fight, explored, you're going to do a couple of things. One, you're going to check to see if you have any end of turn effects, but then you're going to check your pain track. If your pain is maxed out, this is going to give you a bit of a benefit. Your pain is going to increase whenever you fail any skill test, so expect it to happen in this game. If it is maxed out at the end of your turn, you're going to reduce it to 0 and have your choice between a personal quest card or one of the vestige cards from the top of the corresponding decks. This is a bit of a catch-up mechanic, or at least a silver lining to all of those failed skill tests. Once all players have gone through their dawn phase, you're going to move on to the sunset phase. Again, the sunset phase is often going to trigger things on the pilgrimage cards to progress the game forward. You're going to continue the game like this until, at least in this pilgrimage, one player or one penitent has defeated that Nemesis 3 times, getting 3 of their cards. It should be noted that the first 2 of those cards are standard combat cards, But the last one, when you face the Nemesis, is a fervent combat card, which is even more challenging than the other ones. Like I said, this is a very, very punishing game. Now, the game does give you some things to combat that punishment, though. Your characters are going to progress. You are going to get a lot of those resources to trade in for all the things that you need, namely the vestige cards. I would recommend early and often going and taking small steps with exploration and some smaller fights against some level 1 enemies to try to get as many of those vestige cards as you can. Not to mention, you're going to want to focus on some of those abilities to improve your dice. It must be noted that some of these enemies need 3s rolled on these dice, and your starting dice don't even have a 3 on them. So you're going to want to get some faces that have 3s. You're going to want to get some vestige cards that allows you to modify things so that you can actually kind of have a 3. You're going to look for help from other players when you're taking on an enemy that's a little too challenging. And there are even a lot of details here that I've kind of glossed over, but I wanted to give you a general sense of the flow of this game and how it feels to play. But if you have any other questions at all, please make them in the comments below or check out their campaign right now. Until next time, though, make sure everyone has fun at the table, no matter how much punishment you're taking, and we'll see you then.